Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're dropping the pious facades right at the door. We are taking a dark, alchemical descent into a truly tragic myth, tracing the absolute transformation of a pious hermit into the architect of chaos.
As we plunge into the cold, gray clay of this graphic novel-style journey, there is one absolutely crucial thing you have to keep in mind. All those grand illusions of virtue and destiny, they are completely hollow. We are dissecting a worldview that treats existence as a monument to the great absurdity. It's a place where human meaning is, well, nothing but a fragile lie.
So here is the theatrical roadmap for this madness. We'll trace this alchemical evolution through 4 sequential stages: the stagnant orbit, the nigredo, the hollow mirror, and finally, the rubedo.
Act 1. The cracking of the stagnant orbit.
Our story kicks off in the ruins of collective myth. It's fascinating because it contrasts the hermit's past delusions of celestial purpose with the stark, terrifying indifference he eventually embraces. You see, he used to live in the Silvered Grove, where he'd literally interpret the wind as divine guidance. He was stuck on this stagnant orbit, always waiting for external salvation. But moving to the precipice of the Iron Peaks, that forced him to face the inevitable decay of a universe that is just completely indifferent to us.
He finally realized that his psychological fortress, a place he called the Museum of Pride, was just built out of dusty parchment and institutional armor. The era of the shepherd was totally over, so rejecting the pale, bloodless truth of the village builders, he essentially turned his traditional ladder upside down. He stepped right out of that museum and boldly into the verdant absurdity, ready to navigate an infinite nothingness of his very own making.
Act 2. The Nigredo and the Shattering of Masks.
Now we hit the visceral, really dark descent of the Nigredo stage. This is where those golden, colorful masks of chivalry absolutely have to burn. To actually become an architect of meaning, the hermit had to completely dissolve his social standing at the Tribunal of Ash. Right there, at the roots of the world tree of negation, surrounded by the putrefied remains of a fallen god, he had to look his deepest shame dead in the eye. He had to face the ugliest man, which is the absolute inherent selfishness of the soul that we all try to hide behind noble facades.
But here's the twist. Instead of fleeing from that monstrous reflection, he hollowed out his self, until those mirrors became windows overlooking the very abyss he used to fear. By utilizing the mirrors of the hollow souls, he caught the purifying albedo light of the void. He was completely, utterly stripping away his former identity.
Act 3. The wizardry of the hollow mirror.
It's in this violent collision of opposites that his passive suffering transformed into the arcane artistry of the mad rune wizard. He began to physically rewrite reality. We're talking about shifting from carving symbols into his own skin to actually etching chaotic sigils of the divine joke directly into a dead god's flesh. Channeling this raw, sickening violet glow, these runes were meant to pull the very threads of reality apart. He literally invented a fire just to consume the entire idea of a path.
All of this wizardry builds up to this ultimate concept of personal virtue. It proves that true enlightenment is found only by actively embracing cosmic indifference. It's this wild, twice-born harmony where the singer and the suffering completely merge. He wasn't just an observer anymore, you know? The hermit had become the absolute sculptor of his own despair.
Act 4. The coronation of insignificance.
We've finally reached the rubedo stage, a terminal synthesis beautifully captured in this anatomy of futility. Now, putting on my cynical philosopher hat for a second, it is incredibly fascinating to dissect his masterpiece, the altar of entropy. He literally used the fallen god's calcified ribs as a monument to the great absurdity, stitching the void of the sky directly to the rot of the earth. He clutched the dying lantern of a celestial for no other reason than to mock the heavens, and he intentionally laid stones that defied sacred geometry just to expose the absolute illusion of virtue.
By unmaking the very idea of life itself and murdering the memory of the divine, he claimed the terrifying freedom of the overman. This right here is the alchemy of insignificance. It's the sovereign power to define existence through his own will, once all those external meanings are stripped away. He finally got the punchline of his own fate, embracing the chaos with a holy yeah, and finding that, surprisingly, wild lilies bloomed right there in the refined mud of the abyss.
So, as the horizon dissolves into arcane static, the ultimate question of the divine joke is left hanging. When you strip away all external meaning, will you cower
or will you reign over the nothingness? The altar of entropy stands as a beacon for those brave enough to recognize that the self is just a giant hall of mirrors. So ask yourself, when you look into the darkness and see absolutely nothing but yourself, will you step into the arcane static? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you something wild to think about.